Well, I'm very pleased to welcome Corinne Heyning Laverty to join us today to talk about her new book about Channel Islands and natural historical research and science, and really an interesting book about a place that we think we know a lot about, but in fact we probably don't. And this is part of our little series through the Institute on islands in the west or in the eastern basin of the Pacific Ocean. And I'm just thrilled to have Corinne join us. Thank you for the time.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Bill.
That's great. Well, congratulations on the book. I see it there over your shoulder.
Yeah.
It looks good right there. And I see all those binders, which I assume are historical research.
Yes.
It looks like a recognizable tool for a scholar. Let's just start with just kind of a biographical sketch. Who are you, and where'd you grow up, and what were you interested in, and how did you find your way towards this?
Yes, well, it was a long journey. English is not my first language. I was born in Germany, and I lived there till I was about 4. My father's American. We moved to Virginia, actually. I grew up in Virginia, and it was very rural, and my mother loved birds, and we'd find animals that were hurt, and she would always nurse them back to health, and it was, so I had that kind of background. I wanted to be a PhD English professor, but my parents sort of dissuaded me. They said, you really need to get a job that pays. So my dad was like, you can be a secretary, or you can be an engineer, or you can be a nurse or a teacher, or you can go into business. And I knew I wasn't ever going to be an engineer or nurse or a teacher. So I thought, okay, I'll go into business. So I have an undergraduate degree from the University of Virginia in business. And then I came to California after college, and I got a job in aerospace, and I got my MBA at night at the Marshall School at USC.
Wow.
But I always wrote. I continued to write. And so as I worked full-time as a banker, I worked for Union Bank for 25 years, and also had some stints at some of the other larger banks. But I was writing newspaper articles and magazine articles and anything I could possibly write. And I did like the environment. I was very involved in my 20s and 30s and even 40s in environmental issues. I was the president of the American Cetacean Society Los Angeles chapter. I was a whale watch docent on boats. And then I was on the board of directors of the Aquarium of the Pacific. So I had this pretty deep environmental interest, and I happened to marry a whale scientist who was head of research and collections at the Natural History Museum across the street from USC. And we met through our, environmental whale kind of interests. But so I wrote and I worked on that, but it was pretty hard. I actually interviewed Jay Leno right when he became the talk show host after Johnny Carson. I had an interest in cars, and he, of course, had a lot of cars. But it became hard because I had to work, and you have to interview people during the day and go to meetings, and this was way before all the virtual stuff. So I started writing a book. And then my life changed dramatically. We had kids, but my husband got sick and unfortunately passed away after a long illness. And after he passed away, I decided to go back to my writing. And I went to the Natural History Museum with an idea. I wanted to write a book that I'd seen the Harvard Museum do. And I said, let me replicate this. And I went to the archivist and the head of a professional peer-reviewed scholarly writing. And the archivist said to me, if you're going to go to all that work, you should write this story. And she pushed these boxes, dusty archival boxes at me.
Always dusty boxes, yeah.
Yes, and they were labeled the Channel Islands Biological Survey, 1939 to 1941. She said, you should write this story because it's important and it's never been told. And I looked at that title and I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds so boring. But I thought, if that's my opportunity, I should take it, I should give it a chance. So I started going through the archives, which I'd never done before. I'd never done archival research. And I just fell in love with, there was photographs of people and children, and there was newspaper articles and handwritten letters and typed letters and memos, and there's all these lives out there. And I immediately fell in love with these islands. I mean, I'd been to the islands, I dove most of the islands, I was a scuba diver, but I'd never really spent a lot of time on them or thinking about them as places that people inhabited.
Well, did you in your California time and your interest in the environment, when you thought about or visited the Channel Islands, did you have an appreciation for them as a kind of scientific station, or were you thinking, like most of us, I think about the Channel Islands as a sort of playground, a playground for the wealthy, etc. So this must have been a revelation to see the scientific history of the place.
Huge revelation to me, and I had no idea, how important they were to science. And then, of course, as soon as I figured that out, I was like, "Wow, this is an important story." And the other thing that really motivated me, and was very difficult for me to undertake, was the archaeology. The archaeology, I had no idea that these islands played such an important role in the peopling of North America, of our understanding of the peopling of North America. And I always sort of felt like I was fairly well read. I like to read the Smithsonian and National Geographic and all that. And I just thought people walked across the Bering Land Bridge and into the middle of, the country. But you know what? That's not what happened. And the Channel Islands changed much of what we believe now came from the Channel Islands. They were so important. And I thought, gosh, if I don't know that, and I live here, and I love environmental stuff, I bet a lot of people don't know about that.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think, when I teach California history, the peopling of this part of North America is such a lively field that seems to change every year, every few years with new archaeological discoveries. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if more archaeological discoveries are just waiting to happen on the Channel Islands about the habitation of North America.
Well, they really are. They're going to make a lot of progress. They're actually doing some underwater work now. So because the four northern islands were once one island, yeah, and it was much, much larger. And then when sea level rose from the Ice Age melting, many early coastal sites were probably subsumed.
Yeah.
And so they're looking for freshwater seeps underwater, because people like to camp and live near fresh water. And I'll bet they find some more evidence. This is just speculation, but yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I take that bet. I think you're right. We're doing a conference in the fall called Los Angeles Underwater, which is a kind of mixture of things about Los Angeles and the seacoast and water and climate change and sea level rise. And we're going to feature the Channel Islands and some of that archaeological work. So it's really lively stuff. So tell me, the scientific installations and research, is that driven by local universities and scientists, or is it across the United States? So your group in the 1930s, who are they?
Well, the father of the Channel Islands Biological Survey was not a certified scientist, if you will. It was Don Meadows. Don Meadows was a 41-year-old high school biology teacher in Long Beach, California. And he was very ambitious, and he wanted to get a PhD so that he could get a teaching position in higher education. And he came up with this idea of doing something nobody had ever done, which was to study the butterflies and moths on all 8 Channel Islands. And so he realized
as a kind of Corinne, but as a kind of Darwinian thing about this one has this type and that one has that type?
Yes, because no one had ever done it. I mean, there have been scientific expeditions to the islands, but they usually were just a couple islands. Like there was the California Academy went out in 1917 and 1918, and they studied some reptiles like salamanders and lizards. But nobody had done all 8 islands. And that was a lot of work to get out to those islands. So he went to the Natural History Museum, John Adams Comstock, who was also a lepidopterist, and he suggested this. And Comstock saw a lot of merit in this idea, but he had a bigger vision. And he said, oh, yeah, 8 islands, that's good, but let's take all the sciences out. Herpetology, botany, ornithology, biology, geology, anthropology, archaeology, the whole thing. That had never, ever been attempted, and it's never been replicated. It's wow. So enormous. So in the 60s, Department of Defense, together with one other organization, did a big program on the 8 Channel Islands, but it was mostly banding seabirds. Mm. So that was just one species. It wasn't this interdisciplinary approach. So this was the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County's survey, if you will. They sponsored it. It was under their aegis. They did allow citizen scientists like Don Meadows and his Long Beach friends to come along. There were teenagers that participated.
Oh, it sounds life-changing. Yeah, just life-changing.
Yeah.
And they lived on the island for long stretches of time, islands for long stretches of time?
Well, Comstock's idea was it was going to be a 5-year period of time during which they would do collection and field work, but they typically stayed on an island between 1 week and maybe a month. But that's a long time because they had to bring all their own food out, all their own camping gear. And sometimes but oftentimes it was like 1 week and then they'd move to another island for a week and another island for a week and another island for a week. The longest trip was probably 54 days on one island, I think.
Wow. So what explains, it's absolutely fascinating, and it's just like a kind of cornucopic environment for scientific research just off our coast. Mm-hmm. But what explains the dustiness of the archive? How come it had been kind of forgotten?
Well, that's a great question. But you know what? World War II happened. And it shattered so many lives in so many ways. So all of these scientists had these great ambitions for themselves. And then they were actually stranded on Santa Rosa Island when Pearl Harbor hit. The West Coast was blacked out, ship traffic was stopped, radio communication was stopped. Now, it was a working cattle ranch, so they had food and water, but they didn't know how they were going to get home. And John Adams Comstock, the director of science, commandeered a cattle boat that was used to get cattle on and off the island for market, to go out there and get his guys off the island. And he brought them back. And that was the end of the Channel Islands Biological Survey, because then war hit, people were deployed into various, Von Blocher went to the Army. He actually worked on a project called the Bat Bomb. And he loved bats. Yeah. And so he got to use his science in the bat bomb, and so, Woodward, who was the archaeologist, was drafted into the precursor of the CIA, and he was doing ship surveys of South Pacific islands to see where they could set up a landing base and talk to the native people and see if they'd be hostile to them coming on board. And, they all went into the war. Right. And just never got back afterwards. Wow. And money.
So it's just an amazing chapter. And I can see I can just tell by talking to you how tantalizing it is still to you, even though the book is done. So tell me a little bit about, I've got these driven, interesting scientists working across many disciplines. And then what about the layers of the Southern California wealthy, the Wrigleys or the Bannings, the crowd that uses the Channel Islands for different purposes? Do they interleave at all with the scientists?
Well, Alan Hancock did. So Alan Hancock was really important. And as you know, he established the Alan Hancock Foundation. He gave USC quite a bit of money. Yeah. He built this huge modern research vessel, Valero 3, that he donated to the museum, and to the university. And he did it all so that he could have a platform for his own gentleman's science. Yeah. And he went out all over the South Pacific and he collected, and the Natural History Museum contacted him and said, can you give us transportation? Because one of the things that was really interesting, I think, about this survey was that Comstock got it approved by the Board of Governors, and this was an enormous project, right?
That must have cost a lot of money.
It could have, but the reason that I think he was able to get it approved was he promised the Board of Governors that this would cost the museum nothing over and above the regular staff salaries of the scientists involved. Wow. That meant that the citizen scientists like Meadows, whose idea it was, could come, but they wouldn't get paid. It also meant that they had to bring all of their own personal camping gear. It meant they had to buy their own food, hire their own camp cook if they wanted one, and they had to find their own transportation for free or pay for it themselves.
Wow.
So, LA was under police racketeering and political corruption, and it was 1938, 39, the country was
noir. Yeah.
So this alliance with Alan Hancock, and Hancock's boat was the best boat around. When they went to San Clemente Island, which was a military base, even then the military brass boarded the boat and took very detailed notes about how many whaling boats do you have and how many power boats do you have and what kind of engines do you have. But it was a boat that the Valero 3 had cork-lined walls to keep it cool. It had a grand staircase. piano. They would have concerts, onboard concerts. They had a surgeon, a medical staff was part of the boat, the ship.
Is the boat still around?
Well, it got taken over by the military's preparedness. And there's a wonderful note in the file in the archives that says this will be the last voyage of the Valero 3 because the next day it was taken over. And by 1946 or 7 or something, it flew the Kuwaiti flag. And
wow. Amazing.
And so it had this, so I got to look at all these different little pieces.
Absolutely, and personalities. I mean, so in terms of the various scientific inquiries, are there particular discoveries or theories that came out of this work that changed the way those fields look at things?
I don't know about change the way, but well, one thing is the archaeologist, Art Woodward, he unfortunately did not publish a lot about his time on the Channel Islands. He left great field notes, however, and he made good collections. But he is credited with having brought a new level of scientific rigor to archaeological investigations on the Channel Islands. So before that, it was much more curio, Victorian curio hunters, treasure hunters. There was a lot of pot hunting going on. The museum documented incidences of pot hunting and tried to get the Navy to not let those people like Sanger and Glidden, desecrate these sites. So they did work toward that. But Woodward came over and he tried using the grid system, and he drew notes and he kept or drew pictures and did stratigraphy and things like that. So that was important that he is credited.
And those are Chumash people?
Well, the islands were inhabited by 2 different tribes. So the northern group was the island Chumash, and the southern group was the island Tongva or the Gabrielino.
Yeah, right.
But the other thing was, let's see. So, well, anyway, so I think the archaeology was important. That was really important. And the fact that von Blocher wrote the first treatise, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, on the land mammals of the Southern California Islands, that was important because nobody had tried to study all the land mammals, and he did that, and it still stands as, the most complete work done.
And you do have some mammal, some mammal creatures there that have a particular biology because they're on the islands, In other words, kind of a Galapagos notion.
Yes, right. So there are 150 plants and animals that live only on the Channel Islands and nowhere else in the world, including one endemic bird, which is crazy because it's this big scrub jay that lives on Santa Cruz Island. It could easily fly to Santa Rosa Island and go over there, but it doesn't. It just stays on Santa Cruz.
Well, having camped on Santa Cruz Island, I can see the attraction. Why would you want to leave? Yeah.
Exactly.
So you must find. Do you find yourself just pining to get out there and be on those islands? I mean, they must mean something very powerful to you.
I have been on all 8 islands, and
that's unusual. Yeah. That's
very unusual. There's a group called the All 8 Club that's administered by the Santa Cruz Island Foundation. And there's about 229 people going back in history that we can document have set foot on all 8 Channel Islands. And scuba diving does not count. I tried to get that one in early, but the problem with getting on all the islands is mostly the military islands.
Yeah.
They're pretty well regulated, so you have to have a pretty good reason to get out there.
Yeah, but indigenous, the count was 200 and how many?
29.
So, and that's post-indigenous inhabitation. So we wouldn't know how many indigenous. So who's the first non-indigenous group or person who's been on all of them?
Oh, I don't know. I could look it up.
But it's some sea captain or some
probably something like that.
Sheep rancher or something.
Yes, or someone from the Geologic Service might have done something of that nature.
And do you find that there are multiple generations of the same family that still have inhabitations on the islands? Certainly Catalina.
Yeah, Catalina's the Wrigley family. That is true. But the other islands, well, the 4 northern islands and Santa Barbara Island, which is technically a southern island, are part of Channel Islands National Park. So nobody really lives on those islands. Those are, you could camp on them. There's usually small ranger stations. The Vale and Vickers family owned Santa Rosa Island, and they had a cattle ranch and a big game hunting park there, and that was the last cattle ranch in the, island cattle ranch, at least in the continental United States. And that was, I think they ended their tenure in 1998 and then finally took off the last big game hunting and relinquished their home and everything. And I think it was 2011.
Yeah.
So that was a really hard one for that family. And I can understand that because these islands are so meaningful. I mean, they really are special. They're just beautiful and wild. And, you're really out there and they're rugged. Like
Yes.
Santa Cruz, Catalina, San Clemente, these islands are really, really rugged.
Yes, having hiked on Santa Cruz to some of the cliffs and all, I can attest to that. Yeah, no question. So what's next?
Oh, well, I'm writing a novel. I decided I'm going to take a break from research for a little while.
And is it an island novel?
No, but archaeology and sort of that, it's sort of takes a little bit from that. So I'm trying not to lose all of what I've gained and learned. And I'm thinking about what else could I write about the islands or about, building on this. And I think there are some ideas, some things maybe.
Well, goodness gracious, good luck with the novel, but also you and I both know this, that you could show up at the Natural History Museum again tomorrow and some curator or archivist would say, and now here, look at this collection, because they're innumerable, right? And we don't run out of, thankfully, we don't run out of history to write about.
Right. Well, and that's one thing I hope my book accomplished is I think this idea of the scientific process continuing long after individual efforts cease is really important. So what these fellows started, these ladies and gentlemen, I should say, the first two female trained archaeologists were part of this survey, but what they started, they didn't get to finish, but they started it. And they left a flora and faunal library of artifacts at the Natural History Museum. They left field notes. They left specimens and new species that they discovered. And that is the building blocks of what is going on now. These islands are really important to conservation management, learning how to, what climate change, effects of climate change you're going to have, because we've seen that on these islands. So they started that, and a whole legion of young, enthusiastic researchers are out there contributing the work, adding to and contributing to the work that they had begun.
That's a wonderful legacy. I share that fascination with you about field books, just knowing the passion and the kind of meticulous care that these folks took to their work, amateur or professional or anywhere in between. So I think that's a very important legacy to point out. Can you remind us all about the title of the book?
Yes, it is called North America's Galapagos, the Historic Channel Islands Biological Survey.
That's wonderful. Well, we've come to the end of our time. I can't thank you enough. It's very exciting. And I hope that we, as time goes on and the world returns to its axis, we can do an in-person event with as many disciplines present as the survey had. This kind of rich interdisciplinary legacy is absolutely fascinating. So congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us.
Okay.